Hello, everyone. Again, Nick Zuber here with our music. Happy that Nick has again agreed to use his music as my opening, and hopefully we'll have Nick here at some point to be able to talk about what he does. But this is a great song, and I love Nick Zuber and that his live music. He's been able to come to our house a few times and play for us. What a great talent. So welcome, everyone. This is Educational Norm, and I am Norm Potter. This is my first live episode, and today we're going to be talking about the solution-centered mindset and also how to use it in differentiated instruction. But since I'm new to many people, I want to share with you my background so you know what you're getting into. And hopefully we'll be wrapped up in about 20 minutes or so. So if you have other things to do, then you'll have time to do them. This will always be posted on my channel, so you can come back at any time and watch what you're interested in. And obviously some things you won't be interested in, but hopefully I'll help you with some of your teaching and some of your administrative roles that you have at your schools. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Geneva, Ohio, and I'm now living back in that same general area. I have a dog right over there that may cause some issues later, but right now he's sleeping, so we're good. So if you hear a dog in the background, you know what it is. But we have, to go back to where I came from, I grew up in Geneva. I went off to college at Adrian College, very proud alumni, and actually I'm wearing one of their polos right now. After that, I started teaching in Blissfield, Michigan. And in the meantime, I was starting to work on my master's through Siena Heights University, which is also in Adrian, Michigan. I worked for Blissfield Schools for about 8 to 9 years as a teacher and a coach, and also did some administrative work there. And then I moved on to become a director of training for a Michigan Credit Union. Don't hold that against me. It's the University of Michigan Credit Union. I'm an Ohio State fan, but when they pay the bills, it helps. And you get to know people on both sides of the spectrum. I went back into the educational world shortly thereafter at Dundee, Michigan. If you're a hunter, you know where Cabela's is at in Dundee, Michigan. Worked there as a teacher and an administrator also, and also a coach. Then we made a huge move out to Utah, where I got to do some consulting work, wrote my first 2 books, one on volleyball, one on education scenarios. And then that brought me back, my volleyball work brought me back to Geneva to work at Spire to do some volleyball work there. And eventually got back into education in Ashtabula, Madison, Twinsburg, and now I'm off on my own, doing my own thing. So to talk about the topic today, the solution-centered mindset is something that I developed just in the last few years, but it's taken a lifetime to figure out exactly what this is. And as a teacher, I worked on a differentiated instruction plan for many, many years and found it very difficult to actually carry out in a classroom. And if you do a little research, if you type in differentiation doesn't work, you'll find an article there by a gentleman by the name of Delisle, I believe it is. And he cites several other research projects that basically said that, differentiation doesn't work. It's too logistically hard for teachers to implement on a consistent basis in schools. And my experience was very similar. I could not find a good way, because I had a fully inclusive classroom, to work with the gifted students and also my special needs students that were low functioning, how you could actually teach them in a classroom that, made it worth their while. So after 10 years of trying to figure this thing out, I went to the National Middle School Conference down in Louisville, Kentucky. And a group from Kentucky presented differentiation in a different way that made me think of how I might be able to implement it in my classroom. So I used that knowledge and I played around with it for a while. My very first differentiated unit, I can still remember it very clearly. It was on heredity for 8th grade science. And I had a student that at that time was taking 10th grade math over at the high school. And I also had a boy there that couldn't spell his own name most of the time. So I had quite a range of students in that classroom. And I used what I thought was a good model at the time to teach this heredity unit, and it came off really, really well. It was sort of the launching pad of my thought process on differentiation being effective. And so what I've done over the last few years is to try to make it as friendly as possible and as easy as possible for teachers to actually put it in the classroom. I did find that implementing differentiation is still difficult, and on the front end there's a lot of work that has to be done, but once you get it done the first time, then you have it in your repertoire for later. And just a reminder before I go any further, if you do want to make comments, please put down subscribe to this channel, and that will allow you to make comments as we go and chat publicly with me as I'm doing these talks. Obviously, if you're watching it after the fact, you won't have that opportunity, but you can still put in some information, and I'll be happy to get back to it. So going back to this differentiation piece, it wasn't until much later and many more years of teaching and working in schools that I came up with this system that I now call the solution-centered mindset. I took all the negatives that people said about differentiation and why it didn't work. And if you look at Hattie in his first book, if you're not familiar with Hattie, he has this book called Visible Learning. And this Visible Learning book is a meta-analysis of thousands, and at that point it was 800. The very first one was 800 different meta-analyses of research pieces, and differentiation really wasn't mentioned. It wasn't until his second volume that differentiation became a piece, and he did find that it was effective, but there are some limitations to it. So what I did is I took all the limitations that were out there and I addressed them one by one to make it as easy as possible on teachers. And what I found is the process that I used to actually develop the system is the system itself. I knew the solution, and this is where the solution-centered mindset comes into play. I knew the solution. The solution was simple. Differentiation is an effective tool for the classroom, period. That's the solution. The limiting factors are the logistics that go behind it, the resources that are needed, the multiple ways of differentiating. It could be process or product. There are many different things that are going on in differentiation that I address one by one. And what I came up with was a solution-centered mindset that you have the solution. And like I said, this case is differentiation works in the classroom. And the limitations, if you take them one by one, you can make that thing happen. You find a pathway to the solution through the limitations. So with that same idea in mind, if you know the standards that you have to teach, and every teacher has a focus of standards that they have to bring into their classroom, if you start looking at those standards, those become your limitations. Those become things that everybody has to address. The solution is something that you can develop based on real world experience, prior lessons, knowledge of things that kids do outside of school, all those different aspects that you want to bring into the classroom anyway. So if you come up with a solution that's based on the standards you have to teach, you can create this whole differentiated unit by simply adding different limitations to this solution. And I'll give you an example. If you are, let's say the solution is 12 and you're a math teacher, how you go about getting to 12 will be based on the standards that you provide the students. So let's say that you have standards that are first grade standards, and the things that the students would have to do to prove the answer is 12, that will look very different than if a student was in high school calculus. So based on the standards you're given, you tell the students the answer is 12, come up with a problem that gets you to that point. Based on the level of math they are in, that will vary from one topic to another, especially based on the standards that you're going to give them to get there. What if it's a geometric standard and the answer is 12? What if it's a calculus standard and the answer is 12? What if it's a subtraction standard and the answer is 12? How the students get there will vary, and that's differentiated. And their depth of knowledge, using Webb's depth of knowledge, and if you're not familiar with that, that's actually my topic next week. So we'll be talking about depth of knowledge next week. Depending on the depth of knowledge you want them to be at, that will also vary the complexity of the problem. So you have already differentiated a simple unit by giving them a solution that they have to meet with a standard that you're also given. Now, what makes this even better, the standard is what everybody has to do. But if you have a student that's gifted and they are reaching those standards at a level 2 or 3 of Webb's depth of knowledge, then you could add another layer to that by adding another limitation that the students would then have to work through in the complexity of how it fits into the final solution. So if we say the answer is 12 and it's a geometric standard and all those standards have to be hit, another layer you could add on to that very simply would be, I am going to force my gifted kids to have another limitation. And that limitation is the answer has to include the shape of a triangle or a circle. And they have to use that information to also then get to that solution. So not only do they have to meet the standard that's being presented, but now they have to meet it with using a triangle only. And how does that look differently compared to a kid just trying to learn the standard? You've just created a complexity You just created a differentiated unit for a gifted student. You're still holding people to a high standard because they have to know the standard itself. You can dictate the level of complexity based on level 1, 2, 3, or 4 of Webb's depth of knowledge. You have just created with a simple statement a whole new layer of problem for a student. How they get to that solution will vary because of the limitations you put on there. It's a simple way to differentiate. It gives the teacher a lot of advantages. When you start looking at logistically, you're still doing the same outcome. Everybody has the same product at the end. How they got there is what you really have to consider. I am not worried about grades right now. To me, and you'll learn this as we go, grading is something that I take very seriously and obviously hold accountability to students. But I also want them to make students responsible for their own learning. And oftentimes the traditional grading system doesn't work in that regard. So I'm more of a rubric type of person where I can help and provide feedback to get them where they need to be. So with that complexity, I have taken out the extra planning. I've taken out the extra materials. I've actually added a layer of this problem that will challenge kids that normally may not be challenged by the initial work. But I'm also not giving them extra work. I have found that if I do this correctly, the students that struggle with basic information will finish about the same time as the students that I give the more complex problem because they are more in tune and more ready to learn that concept. So they usually finish right around the same time if you know your kids really well. Now, it doesn't have to be something as simple as I'm going to add another geometric feature. What I have found is that if you add a standard from outside of your content area, let's say that we're doing a math standard, or we'll do this one since I used math last time. We'll talk about social studies. Let's say I'm doing a social studies standards about trade and how that works in the Silk Road of the ancient times. And I wanted to add an art standard to it or performance standard. That in and of itself, because it's so different from where you started with the social studies standards, it will bring in outside topics and other thoughts on how you could present this information to create your solution to make it work in your classroom differently than what it ever has before. So if we're talking about the Silk Road and we're bringing in art for an example, we might create artifacts that deal with the Silk Road. We may want to create maps that deal with the Silk Road. One thing I'll caution though is that do not let the project of this lesson overwhelm the amount of time you're going to spend on this and make the time way more than what it should be to learn the standard. That's one issue that a lot of projects get into, is that they consume, and I was guilty of this many, many years. I would do a project that was so big and they would spend so much time on it in class, I lost teaching time. There has to be a balance. You have to find an easy way, and you can, on the final outcome product versus how much time you're going to spend to learn the standard. So there's a fine balance there. And over time, I got better at planning those things out. And you will too as you do these things, because you don't want to waste any precious time that you have. So when you're starting to add those outside features of other standards like art, it does bring a different perspective, but you can also relate it to real life problems, or you can relate it to careers that students may be interested in. Another example that I could use that does that exactly, and this would get into that realm of project or problem-based learning. They are different. And if you look at what you could do with those, I'm going to use this example that was used in a high school, where the solution is we're going to create a 5G network within our town. Now, there's no way a high school student knows how to do that. But as they go through the process and they learn how to do it, we're now involving math standards, science standards, and potentially social studies standards because of the regulations that are required to be met in each community that will change how you are able to establish a 5G network in that community. So if you really wanted to do that as a solution-centered mindset problem, then you would be able to come up with that solution, which you have, and then pull out the standards that fit. I would recommend the other way around, where you have the standards pulled out first and you create the solution based on the standards, so you know you're on target. But in this case, this solution was presented to me by somebody at Verizon, and they thought it would be a great problem for the kids to try to get through. And so we went that way. And then I went out and found the correct classrooms that it would fit into based on the standards they cover. So it is standards based. It's just a little bit different than how we initially planned on doing it. So this whole differentiation piece and how you can use it with the solution centered mindset is something unique. It's something new that I've just developed over the last few years with the help from partners like my people in Twinsburg, Ohio. I'll shout out to them right now. Beth Mariola and Lauren Fenning. They helped me sort of fine tune this with some deep discussions on how things work. And if you want more information on the solution centered mindset, you can go to my website, which is Structured Creativity Consulting. Yes, it's a mouthful, structuredcreativityconsulting.com. Or you can email me at norm@normpotter.com, and I will get back to you as soon as I get your email. So those are the ways to get a hold of me if you want to learn more about this solution-centered mindset. And it's not just a curriculum model that I use this for. I have program development and improvement that I use this for, very easily done. And I also use it for, everyday situations. So the solution-centered mindset is a much bigger piece than just curriculum development that I'm willing to share with anybody that's interested. Bring me out to your school. I'll be happy to do that. Also, with this process, you actually are developing the rubrics for grading as you go through the process, which again, I'll be happy to cover later if there's an interest. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that people knew about this whole idea of what I'm trying to do with Educational Norm is to provide professional development for teachers at a low cost, no cost platform. And if you hear things that you are interested in, I would obviously love the chance to be able to come out and work with either you personally or with a staff in a school building or a team or even in a district. I do motivational talks. I provide a lot of different services that are needed, especially in this time frame, to be able to differentiate either in person or online, synchronous or asynchronous, whatever it may be. I'm personally teaching college courses in a synchronous manner for middle level philosophy, but also I do some in-person things. So if you have a need or desire to learn more about what we do, feel free to contact me again at norm@normpotter.com, or check out my website if you need more information, structuredcreativityconsulting.com, and I'll be happy to get back to you. One of the things that I'm going to finish off every day or every time I do one of these, because we'll be doing these weekly, is a slogan that I have. And as I say this, I have to remind you also to subscribe so you can leave chat. But I also want you to subscribe just so I can get this following going and help spread the word on what I feel is a good way of differentiation. And I will be creating more of these as we go. And if you have specific needs for your school, you send them out there. And I'm actually doing one for a school on data analysis of their state scores. So I'm happy to customize if needed. And I'm also looking for input on time of day. I realize people work at time of day at noon, but I'm willing to do this in the evening and maybe make it more casual. So it's not, just me talking at you, but if I get feedback and you have a beverage in your hand or you're eating, I don't have a problem with that. And we can have a conversation going back and forth. But for this first one, I really appreciate you taking time to look at this. And I hope that you get back to me one way or another to give me some feedback on what I just said and how you might be able to use it in your classroom. And again, my name is Norm Potter. This is Educational Norm. My business is Structured Creativity Consulting. And as I sign off, be kind, be professional, and find solutions. Have a great day.